Ted Bundy remains a name synonymous with cold-blooded evil. He was not the typical monster hiding in the shadows. He was handsome, articulate, and dangerously charming. Bundy proved that a killer can hide in plain sight. He used his intellect as a weapon of mass deception. To the world, he was a promising young law student. Behind that smile was a void of absolute darkness. His story is a chilling study of the mask of sanity. He never attacked his victims directly at first. He preferred to manipulate their kindness and empathy. A fake cast or a set of crutches was his usual ruse. Young women saw a man in need and stepped forward. That act of compassion would be their final mistake. His Volkswagen Beetle became a mobile chamber of horrors. He removed the passenger seat to hide his victims. How could someone so brilliant be so profoundly broken? The answer lies in a fractured childhood and deep-seated rage. He feared rejection, yet craved total, ultimate control. He turned a personal heartbreak into a nationwide killing spree. Every murder was a calculated move in a sick game. He left a trail of bodies across multiple American states. For years, law enforcement struggled to connect the dots. Bundy was a chameleon, changing his appearance constantly. He relished the attention and the power he held over others. His ego was as massive as his capacity for violence. He chose to represent himself in a court of law. That arrogance ultimately led to his downfall. Bundy taught the world that the most dangerous monsters are often the most polite. He shattered the collective sense of safety in America. His secrets reveal the terrifying reality of the human predator. Ted Bundy's origin story began with a web of lies that likely fractured his psyche from the start. Born in Vermont, he grew up believing his mother was actually his sister and that his grandparents were his parents. This fundamental betrayal of truth left him with a deep-seated resentment toward authority and a lack of trust in human connections. Psychologists believe this early instability contributed to his inability to form genuine empathy, creating a hollow space where a conscience should have been. In his university years, Bundy was a high-achieving psychology student who appeared to have a bright future in politics. He was well-liked by his professors and peers, often seen as a rising star within the Republican Party. However, this was merely a curated persona designed to grant him access to social circles where he could observe and select his targets. He studied the human mind not to heal it, but to exploit its vulnerabilities and understand how to blend in perfectly with normal society. A pivotal moment in his descent into violence was his failed relationship with a wealthy, beautiful woman named Diane Edwards. She eventually broke up with him, citing his lack of direction and social status. This rejection devastated Bundy and fueled a lifelong obsession. Many of his future victims shared a striking physical resemblance to Diane, suggesting that his killing spree was a twisted attempt to reclaim the power he felt he had lost during that breakup. By 1974, young women in the Pacific Northwest began disappearing without a trace. Bundy had perfected a routine where he would frequent libraries or parks, pretending to be injured or struggling with heavy objects. He would ask for help, luring unsuspecting women to his car. Once they reached the vehicle, the helpful stranger would transform into a violent assailant, striking them unconscious before they realized the danger they were in. The infamous 10 Volkswagen Beetle served as his primary tool for abduction. He had customized the interior by removing the passenger seat, allowing him to lay his victims flat on the floorboards so they wouldn't be seen by passersby. This car was a silent witness to countless atrocities. Even today, the vehicle is preserved in a crime museum, standing as a chilling artifact of his methodical and predatory nature. Bundy's crimes were not just about murder, they were about total domination. He was a necrophile who returned to his victims' remains multiple times, sometimes even applying makeup to them or styling their hair. This level of depravity shocked even the most seasoned investigators. It highlighted a level of mental illness that went beyond simple rage, revealing a man who viewed human beings as mere objects for his own gratification. As the body count rose in Washington and Oregon, Bundy moved to Utah to attend law school, taking his dark urges with him. It was here that he met Carol Derench, the woman who would eventually bring him down. He approached her at a shopping mall while disguised as a plainclothes police officer, telling her someone had tried to break into her car. He convinced her to get into his vehicle to go to the station, but his plan took a violent turn. Carol Derrich managed to fight back with extraordinary bravery, jumping out of the moving car and flagging down help. Her escape provided the police with the first real description of the Ted they had been hunting. It was a rare moment of failure for Bundy, whose overconfidence had led him to believe he was untouchable. This slip-up eventually led to his first arrest when a patrol officer pulled him over for a routine traffic violation inside Bundy's car. Police found a kit that left no doubt about his intentions: a crowbar, a ski mask, handcuffs, and trash bags. Despite his attempts to talk his way out of the situation, the evidence was mounting. He was eventually convicted of kidnapping Carol Derrich, but the authorities were starting to realize that he was responsible for much more. The scale of his crimes across multiple states began to come into focus as investigators shared information. Bundy's arrogance was on full display during his incarceration in Colorado. Believing himself smarter than the system, he took advantage of his right to act as his own attorney, which allowed him access to the law library without shackles. During a break in a hearing, he jumped from a second-story window and fled into the mountains. Though he was caught days later, his ability to evade security made him a folk hero to some and a nightmare to the rest of the country. His second escape was even more daring and calculated. Bundy starved himself until he was thin enough to fit through a small crawl space in the ceiling of his cell. He spent weeks practicing and planning, eventually shimmying through the ducts and walking out the front door of the jail in a stolen guard's outfit. This lapse in security allowed him to flee to Florida, where he would commit his most heinous and frantic acts of violence. In Tallahassee, Bundy's mask of sanity finally shattered. He broke into the Chi Omega sorority house in the middle of the night, hacking several women in their sleep with a piece of firewood. The brutality was unprecedented, marked by a lack of the careful planning he had used in the past. It was a desperate, chaotic explosion of violence that signaled he had lost control of the entity he claimed lived inside him. The trial that followed in Florida was a media circus and a historical milestone. It was the first trial to be televised nationally, turning Bundy into a household name. He reveled in the spotlight, wearing sharp suits and engaging in witty banter with the prosecution and the judge. He even proposed to his girlfriend, Carol Ann Boone, in the middle of the courtroom, exploiting a legal loophole to marry her on the spot. Despite his theatrical performance, the physical evidence was undeniable. The prosecution used forensic odontology to match bite marks on one of the victims to Bundy's unique dental structure. In an era before DNA was common, this was groundbreaking. The jury found him guilty, and Judge Edward Cowart sentenced him to death, famously telling him that he was a total waste of humanity despite his potential as a lawyer. While on death row, Bundy's manipulation continued. He spent years filing appeals and offering bits of information about unsolved cases to delay his execution. He became a sort of consultant for the FBI, helping them understand the psychology of serial killers to catch others like him. He eventually confessed to 30 murders, though many believe the actual number could be over 100, spanning across several different states. Bundy's relationship with Carol Ann Boone resulted in the birth of a daughter while he was in prison, a fact that remains one of the stranger details of his life. Despite his status as a monster, Boone remained loyal until his final confessions made the truth impossible to ignore. She eventually divorced him and changed her identity, disappearing from the public eye to protect her child from her father's dark legacy. In his final interview before execution, Bundy blamed his actions on the influence of violent pornography. While some saw this as a sincere warning, most experts viewed it as his final attempt to shift blame and manipulate public opinion. He wanted to die as a victim of a societal problem rather than as a man who made choices to destroy lives. It was his last performance for an audience he had captivated for decades. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed by electric chair at Florida State Prison. Outside the gates, crowds cheered and set off fireworks, celebrating the end of a long national nightmare. He died without ever showing true remorse for the women he had killed or the families he had destroyed. His body was cremated, and per his request, his ashes were scattered in the mountains where he had hidden his victims. The legacy of Ted Bundy remains a warning about the dangers of the charming stranger. He changed the way law enforcement tracks serial killers and how the public perceives safety. He proved that evil doesn't always look like a villain in a movie. Sometimes it looks like a neighbor, a classmate, or a friend. His story continues to fascinate and terrify because it reminds us that the most dangerous monsters are the ones who know how to smile. Modern forensics often use Bundy's case as a textbook example of behavioral profiling. His ability to lead a double life, one as a law student and another as a predator, is a classic study in sociopathy. He lacked a stop button, a moral compass that prevents normal people from acting on their darkest impulses. By dissecting his methods, investigators have become better at spotting the red flags of predatory behavior before it escalates. The Bundy effect also describes the strange attraction some people feel toward violent criminals. During his trial, he received hundreds of love letters from women who believed they could change him or that he was misunderstood. This phenomenon, known as hybristophilia, highlights a dark corner of human psychology where power and danger are mistaken for charisma and romance. Despite the decades that have passed, many of Bundy's victims have never been found. He took the locations of several burial sites to his grave, leaving families in a state of eternal grief and uncertainty. This final act of withholding information was his way of maintaining control even in death. He remains a figure of intense study, a man who represented the absolute worst of what humanity is capable of when intellect is stripped of morality. Bundy's tin beetle, now on display, serves as a haunting reminder of the era of the serial killer. In the 1970s, the lack of centralized police databases made it easy for him to cross state lines and disappear. His case was a catalyst for the creation of more sophisticated criminal tracking systems. He unintentionally helped build the very tools that would have made his crimes impossible to commit in the modern world. The psychology of Ted Bundy is still debated by experts today. Was he born a monster, or did his environment create him? While his upbringing was unconventional, many people survive far worse without becoming killers. Most experts agree that Bundy possessed a unique combination of genetic predisposition and psychological triggers that allowed him to compartmentalize his life with terrifying efficiency. Bundy's intellectual vanity was perhaps his greatest flaw. He truly believed he was the smartest person in any room, which led him to make mistakes like representing himself or trying to outsmart the FBI. In the end, it wasn't a brilliant detective who caught him, but a combination of a brave survivor, a routine traffic stop, and his own inability to stop his compulsive need to kill. The impact on the families of the victims can never be overstated. For every documentary or movie made about Bundy, there are dozens of families whose lives were shattered by his hands. True crime fans are often reminded to center the victims rather than the killer, as Bundy's greatest wish was to be remembered and admired for his cunning rather than loathed for his cruelty. As we look back at the secrets of America's most infamous serial killer, we see a man who was a master of the mask. He exploited the very best traits of humanity: kindness, trust, and helpfulness to perform the very worst acts. His life ended in a burst of electricity. But the questions he raised about the nature of evil and the fragility of the human social contract remain as relevant as ever. The story of Ted Bundy is a chilling reminder that the boogeyman doesn't always stay under the bed. Sometimes he drives a nice car, studies the law, and asks you for a hand with his groceries. By understanding the secrets of his charm and the depth of his depravity, we learn to look past the surface and recognize the darkness that can hide behind a handsome face. Bundy remains the ultimate cautionary tale in American history. He was the man who turned a tan Volkswagen into a symbol of fear and a courtroom into a stage for the macabre. As long as people seek to understand why some individuals cross the line into unspeakable violence, the name Ted Bundy will be studied, analyzed, and feared. Ultimately, Ted Bundy was a man who chose darkness over light at every opportunity. He had the intelligence to do great things, but chose instead to be a thief of lives. His death brought justice, but it could never bring back the stolen potential of the women he murdered. He remains a dark stain on the history of the 20th century, a predator who showed us the true face of a monster.